kick us off here. Welcome everyone to the quarterly What's Happening in Washington series that we at G2G have been doing with Chris Campbell and Chris Oates for a couple of years now. And I am Becky Watts. I'm joined by my colleague, Katie Collins. We are standing in for Liz Powell today, who normally moderates the session. Liz Powell is the founder of G2G, which stands for Government to Growth. We are a lobbying and government affairs firm, and we have a presence in Washington, D.C., as well as several other locations in the Midwest and East Coast. And we are very excited. Katie and I are excited to stand in for Liz today. She is up in Boston at an ARPA-H Women's Health Symposium or meeting. And so we're sorry to miss out today, but we are excited to talk to the Chris's about what's happening in DC and economic implications and elections, et cetera. So just a bit of background about me. I've been with G2G for over 15 years, working with Liz and working on policy at the federal and state levels on behalf of our clients, which are range from health innovation, high-tech innovation to nonprofits in the human services space, education, a lot of membership organizations, advocacy with consortiums around various amazing change-making type topics. So it's a privilege to be here. And before joining Liz, I worked on Capitol Hill in the Senate on appropriations, and I worked in the Ohio State House before that. So again, excited to be here. We'll do a little round of intros before we get into the questions. So I will pass it quickly to Katie to do an intro, and then to the Chris's.
To the Chris's. Hey, everybody, I'm Katie Collins. Like Becky, I'm a vice president at G2G. I lead our federal affairs practice. Been with the firm for about 4 years. My background is in health policy, both at the agency level and in the White House. I spent 6 years in the Obama-Biden White House, continuing with Biden's policy work outside of the White House, and then doing some congressional advocacy for the National Institutes of Health. So it's great to be with you. And Chris Campbell, we'd love to hear your background and take it away.
Excellent, thanks. Thanks everyone for joining. Chris Campbell, I spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill. I was a top staffer for Senate Judiciary Committee, then top staffer for Senate Finance Committee. Was confirmed as Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Treasury and the past administration, and then left, and now I have my own firm. I did intermediary step with a large financial firm, which I helped sell, and now I have my own practice, helping clients navigate and build significantly, mostly funds and large families. In regulated spaces. So that's kind of what I do. And yeah, it's good to be here, and it's good to see everyone again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Chris Oates. I have not worked on Capitol Hill. I have worked on Beacon Hill in Boston. My background is as a political risk analyst, so trying to forecast what is likely to happen in government for clients in both the private sector and in government. Ran my own consulting firm. I worked on a ballot campaign, which lost. And I now have a startup, which is a policy information platform. So keeping up with both the basics of politics and the analysis, and very happy to be here to talk about both.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here. So we are going to talk about some topics, and then welcome those of you who've dialed in to feel free to put questions in the Q&A that we will try to address toward the end. So kicking things off about Congress, we were kind of all laughing before we came on here about, what is Congress? Like, is there a Congress? So would love to just get into that a little bit, and starting with the federal spending bills. We're approaching the end of February, and we are, in the middle of technically the fiscal year 24, and yet we still do not have the final appropriations bills for the current fiscal year passed and enacted. What do you predict? Are you hopeful they'll get done? Any nuances? What to look for in a final omnibus bill? And how will this impact fiscal year 25? We'll start with Chris Campbell.
Good luck. No, I think I think that we're in a very difficult spot. Everyone's now observed, sort of turn their TV on to recognize and realize how difficult it is to do this foreign aid package. As I've said now for far too long, and it's unfortunately been right every time I've said it, and that is that immigration's now been interjected into this. Immigration is a better issue for both parties than it is a solution. It again has demonstrated that again, and so it doesn't really matter. Both sides have played politics with immigration for as long as I can remember, and it's still, we're still in that same hamster wheel. And so, I can somehow the magic of how a sausage is made in DC is going to have to somehow find a way to extract immigration from this package and trying to find some way to thread the needle on Ukraine aid, which is going to be very difficult. And just be candid with you, I'm a creature of the Senate and kind of grew up working very closely with Senator McConnell and Senator Reid and Senator Schumer. And I've always been able to, and I kind of think that my time in Washington has always been either McConnell or the Democratic leader would kind of save the day, and I just don't know if that's possible now, given the dynamics, the rates within majority in the Senate, sort of the House as Republicans, and so I don't know. There was always a plan B and C. There always is, except I don't know if there is in this case. I really don't know if there is one. And so it looks like we're in a collision course for some significant challenges, no surprise in Washington, that I think likely will lead to, government shutdowns. And I don't know what's going to mean for the foreign aid that our allies are going to greatly depend upon. And so I do know that immigration is likely not going to be a part of that package. I do know that I think it's still a question mark as to how much or what form the aid to Ukraine gets passed. I think that passage of the other two aid packages it's a no-brainer. I mean, if they were, I think they'd go almost unanimously, with Israel and others. So I think it's just really complicated, and there was this weird two-step process that the House created on funding the government, which I think it allows the government now to fail twice, which is amazing. So I think I just think we're in a really weird collision course where I think it's going to take significant amount of pressure to get the two bodies to come together, and it's hard to imagine that pressure not coming without a government shutdown.
Interesting points. Chris Oates, do you think there's a plan B or C?
I mean, there definitely is a plan B. The question is whether people use it, because as Chris Campbell said, the Senate passed actually two bills, or they were ready to pass two bills. Democrats and Republicans were clearly ready to pass foreign aid and border security until Donald Trump said, don't do that. You're going to give Biden a win in an election year. And then enough people folded. I think it was Lindsey Graham who was called by the chief Republican negotiators staff a chaos agent, because he just kept changing his mind on what he wanted. But clearly there are the votes there with border security, and then they passed it without border security. But now it's being held up in the House because Speaker Johnson, who said it's dead on arrival, and clearly I think it's because of Ukraine aid. And I think he does not want to alienate what Democrats and other Republicans would call the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party. They would obviously deny that criticism, but I think they're opposing the Ukraine aid going through. Now, some of them have said, Republican member of the House, that it will go through, because either the speaker will bring it to the floor and it will pass with large majority, or they will sign on to a discharge petition. which allows basically a majority of the House to sign a petition to say, we want this bill to the floor, and it goes to the floor without the speaker. Now, the discharge petition is one of those unicorns in Washington that people talk about, but they've never actually seen in public. Because to sign on to the discharge petition is basically saying, the leader of my party, I will undermine that person. And we know that Republicans in the House are willing to undermine the speaker because 8 of them ousted Kevin McCarthy last year. But those were a different type of Republicans than talking about the discharge petitions. It was, Matt Gaetz and the other 7 are not known for following leadership. They seem to be willing to buck that trend, but the folks that would be signing onto this discharge petition are the ones that supported McCarthy, backed Senator or Representative Johnson when he seemed to be the person to come in and kind of quiet everything down when there was the chaos of not being able to choose a speaker. Will those people actually be willing to buck the leadership of their party, be willing to show that their speaker doesn't really have control of the floor to sign on to that discharge petition? That is, I think, the big question, because there was a quote, I believe it was last year during the debt ceiling, saying that, all we have to do is assume that the moderate Republicans will cave, and that's what's always happened. Now that I think might be unfair, but that was said by those seeking to oust McCarthy, and he was ousted. And so I think this is the question. Will there be, either because the speaker says we're going to do it, or because members say they're going to do it, will there be a vote on the floor for Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel aid? Again, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. I think anyone who tells you that they do know is self-aggrandizing. But I think that's going to be the big question over the next month, because we're now, it was for 4 months, well, we're going to negotiate on the border as well. So we're willing to wait on that vote because we're trying to get this border security deal done. Now that that has seemingly failed, now that Avika has fallen in eastern Ukraine, I think there is much more pressure to actually get this done, because it's now being seen that Ukraine really needs this aid. So there is greater pressure, but the House is on vacation for 2 weeks. So that is another big question mark. So ultimately, this is a very long way of saying there is a possible way out of it, but no one really knows if it will actually happen, because it depends on either Speaker Johnson bringing the vote to the floor, even though he's clearly been unwilling to do so, or at least a few Republicans signing on to what might be, their the worst thing they can do from a sense of their own future primary challenges.
Thank you.
It's also quickly important to note, and I'm not a House person, so someone's going to fact check me on this, but discharge petitions take time. I think they take 30 days. I think I'm right. So even if when the House comes back, they start a discharge petition, we would still be in a government shutdown.
Interesting. Yeah, the discharge petition, kind of a vehicle that hasn't been invoked too much yet. Well, in talking about a little bit about the sort of the different factions within the Republican Party, I think kind of leads to an interesting question about we've heard about 50 members of Congress who announced they're leaving Congress, including many physicians and health policy leaders, Drs. Burgess and Wenstrup, Chairwoman Kathy McMorris Rodgers, leaving a huge gap in the ENC committee, in the House, several moderates who are sort of the get things done type members. What do you think is going on? What does this signal for elections in the future control of the 2 chambers? Chris Oates, do you want to start?
Sure. So the relevance of incumbency has been dropping over the years. That's a finding from, say, 538 and others who've studied this. So usually you'd think an incumbent leaving, makes the seat more vulnerable. I think that is still somewhat true, but it's not as true as it used to be. And obviously most members of Congress are from safe districts, so they have less implications of whether that seat will flip than the otherwise, would be. I think Joe Manchin is one very clear example of, he's the only Democrat that can win that seat. So him leaving makes it almost a guaranteed Republican seat. I think what it does show is what maybe they're thinking about the future of the chamber, because no one wants to be in the minority in the House, where, rather than being in the majority. So often what you would see is people would leave in anticipation of losing the next election because they just don't want to go from being the majority to the minority. And so that could be it. It could be the Republicans are saying, you know, there's a good chance that we're going to lose the House. We only have it by a few seats. There's some good signs from New York for Democrats that they're going to change the maps to give them that majority. But also there are Democrats leaving. And I think this may be more reflective of just the idea that working in the House, especially the House, is not as enjoyable as it used to be. You don't get paid a ton of money. You get paid, I believe it's $174,000, and you need to maintain 2 residences on that salary. You're almost certainly giving up much more lucrative options somewhere else. And it could be, and now you have much more control of policy dictated by leadership. So, you know, do you really want to go for 2 years? Every day people are criticizing you, you're not earning a lot of money, you're not seeing your family Tuesday morning through Thursday evening when it's in session, when you could go be a lobbyist or like Ben Sass, chairman of a university system, and have a lot more fun, a lot less stress, and you'll always have that on your resume that you were a member of Congress. So maybe it's that it's just a less enjoyable place to work. But I mean, Chris Campbell, you've actually worked there. Maybe you're hearing from your former colleagues that everyone hates it.
Yeah, like I mean, especially like I was always the kind of guy and always worked for members that were kind of the get it done kind of folks. And so I think that unfortunately, I think that those are a bit of a dying breed. There's more show horses than work horses, as we say in DC nowadays, which is really frustrating. I think for people like me and my ilk. But that notwithstanding, I think that look. It always happens. It's funny. We always forget this thing, or like our memory gets wiped every 2 to 4 years. But I can think that members of Congress live this every single day. They do calculations every single day. They basically pulling much more than we do, and they live by them. And they certainly talk to members of their people in their district. And what I think they realize is what I think that those folks that watch this realize as well, is that there is likely at or near 100% chance the House is going to go Democrat and the Senate's going to go Republican. And so if you're a Republican member right now in the House, probably one of the worst jobs on the planet is being in the minority in the U.S. House of Representatives. And they all know that, certainly those who've been around a long time. And so there's a lot more things that are a lot more fun, a lot more lucrative, allow you to spend more time with the family that you could be doing. And I think they're all assessing their options, and many of them are finding greener pastures. I literally cannot blame them. But I think, not to step on the lead, but I think that, at least my call is that we're at or near 100% chance of the 2 chambers flipping. Going into 25, which I think, those who like divided government will be happy. Those who don't won't be happy. And, and that's that. But I think that that's likely, just seeing the map of the Senate, and the level of frustration for the American people and for the members of Congress. I just think that and as we're going to get to this later, and kind of typically where the economy may be, certainly it's going to be a bad time to be an incumbent in DC, in my estimation.
Thank you. So just building upon what you both have already discussed a little bit in terms of kind of what Congress is working on or not working on, just between now and the end of the year, or now on election day, what do you think, beyond what we've discussed already, immigration and Ukraine and spending packages, if there's anything beyond that, will be sort of the top of mind issues for Congress between now and election day? What do Republicans want to get done versus Democrats, and where does the administration fit? Chris Campbell.
Well, I think they may all want to do a lot of stuff. I don't think they're going to do it much. Other than what must be done. I think the only thing that's on my radar that would be, is we're more in a business. The folks on this call are mostly business folks. I think that, I could think what may be impactful is likely going to be what we call a tax extenders package. It'll be a tax bill that'll be passed that will extend benefits under the tax code that typically are meant for businesses, a lot of small businesses, which will be good. I think that'd be a good sign. There's wide bipartisan agreement in both the Senate Finance Committee, the committee I used to run, and then the House Ways and Means Committee, the sister committee of the Finance Committee. And they've recorded the bill, and so I think that's likely ripe for passage. Probably will take a rider along with the government funding. But I think other than that, I think there's going to be. I wouldn't hold my breath for a lot of breaking things happening. Of course, if something crazy happens or something, barring some outsized event, I think that we're likely going to be in that's what's going to get done type of thing for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I think that, we've said on these calls before that, a lot of policy now goes through an appropriations package. And I think this might be a year where that doesn't happen for minor stuff, as Chris Campbell said with the tax extenders package. I can see certain things that are relatively minor, non-controversial, bipartisan support that would otherwise be lumped into an appropriations policy, maybe getting brought to the floor for a vote. But these are very small things, probably of little concern to the general public. Well, certainly to the general public, even to the the political junkie class. It would be a bit more like technical regulatory changes or legislative changes. Slightly more than renaming a post office. But the things that you would otherwise see, buried on page 10 of a summary of a big appropriations bill might be broken out this year, just because again, that the sort of thing that the staffs are working on, but nothing big. And I think the biggest question for the spring is really going to be the Ukraine aid, to a lesser extent, the rest of the aid packages, if border security does get done, which I doubt, probably CRs, and then maybe impeachment stuff goes on forward. I doubt it, certainly since the source about Hunter Biden has just been arrested. So I doubt there's going to be any more of that, but you never know. So those kinds of I don't want to say shenanigans, but for lack of a better word, shenanigans around political theater might happen over the course of the year. But I mean, we're in election year, so there's always shenanigans.
Speaking of shenanigans, I will pass it now to you, Katie, to talk about elections and politics.
Yeah, that's a good way to transition there. So let's start talking about the upcoming presidential race, which once again seems to be all about Biden and Trump, in some ways a replay of 2020. But dynamics are a little bit different now. We're seeing that Biden's disapproval rating is at an all-time low, lowest among recent presidents. Meanwhile, despite multiple legal challenges, I guess we'll call them, that could result in a conviction, Trump continues to perform really well in polling and to have emerged as the Republican Party's overwhelming top candidate. So I wondered if we could talk a little bit about why is Biden seeming so unpopular? Why is Trump seeming to rise above some significant challenges to remain on top? What are your thoughts about the two candidates as we head into the summer and the fall? Chris Campbell.
Dang, I thought it was gonna be like Chris.
Sorry.
So I think there's a lot to unpack there. So I think my gut was always that if the Democrats chose to indict the former president, he would become a martyr. And I believe that it was the only chance he would actually, going back in time when the Democrats decided to indict. I think I really think he was on a kind of a path to not get the nomination. But yeah, I could think that when they decided to move on that, I think it just significantly changed the trajectory. And so I think it breathed life into his campaign that I genuinely don't think it would have been there, but it is now. So we're now in a place, I think, now that as a former president is good at doing, he's found a, ways to caricature President Biden that resonate with the average American. He's too old, all those kinds of things. He's lost a step. Like he's doing what he does. And so I think that he's in the way that the Trump legal team has now, I think what it looks like they'll be successfully done is lined up the dominoes for the trials. The first and weakest one, first one being the weakest in New York, where he's likely going to win. If he doesn't win, definitely would win on appeal. In my opinion, I think that you have this, and I think all the federal cases will be pushed after the election. And so I think that we have this weird thing, and I think one thing that's, most people know I'm traditionally a Republican, but I'm a very, very moderate Republican, equal friends on both sides, was confirmed by 100 senators to Treasury. There is, even if you talk to even the most ardent progressive out there and ask them if Donald Trump would he be facing all these criminal trials if his last name wasn't Trump, they will say no, right? So it's baked in the DNA. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. You don't want the former president to be president. We don't want whatever, for whatever reason. There's been the detente, I guess, in American politics where we just haven't done this. And it's important to note that all those people who decided to indict the president happen to be Democrats. And so it's just kind of like baked in the cake that this is politically motivated. It's something that the president says over and over and over again. That's really, really resonating with vast swaths of majority of Americans. I think what's interesting, so I think that again, the politics of that, I'm happy to talk through more, I think, but what I think is fascinating is the break that the Democratic Party has now with African-American and Hispanic voters, that if accelerates or maintains its present course, just on that alone, President Trump will become president again. And so I think that, we're on a almost like a bullet train, candidly, in my opinion, to see the former president get 4 more years. And I think, it's we can quabble about how good that will be. But I think, there's just so many things, so much headwind from the current president that President Biden is facing, that I think is just going to be really, really difficult. I'm now at a place, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I think I'm at a place that even if President Trump is found guilty in New York on the hush money trial, I think he still wins. I think he wins actually from the jail cell in New York. I think it's there's just so much. There's so much politically motivated in that, and certainly in that one, that it's just, I think so many Americans see themselves as like crap, that they can do it to him, they can do it to me, and he's very good at drawing those connections. And so he's Democrats unfortunately are playing into some of his significant strengths. He's using every bit of the ammunition that they're giving him for that. I think it's, but I think it's going to be a bloody battle. I think it's going to be difficult. It's going to be, by the time November comes along, we're going to be just incredibly sick of this stuff. It's going to be one of the longest campaigns we've ever had, with two of the oldest people ever running for office for the presidency. And it's just going to be, highly toxic. I think it's, I don't know, but so hopefully we'll find a way to get through this, but it's going to be a really difficult year for lots of reasons. But I think it's politics is going to become very, very, it always has been sharp elbows. These are going to be daggers in the elbows. But I digress, and I'll let Chris do his talk his book.
Sure. So I'm more bullish on Biden than you are. I mean, I'm not saying like he's absolutely going to win. I think it's, still very close, but if I were betting, I'd say it's, 55-45 Biden. And that's because I think we're at a moment where Trump is probably at his highest and Biden is at his lowest. And I think the approval rating is a good example of that in the current polls. So Biden is absolutely at his lowest approval rating. And I think every Democrat would agree they would love it if Biden magically became 10 years younger or 15 years younger. If the machine.
A lot of us would love this technology.
Yes. I mean, if that, Steve Urkel's technology where he became Stefan Urkel in Family Matters, if that existed and he could become Joseph Biden, Democrats would love that. That's, I think, his biggest headwind. And I think he's 4 years older than he was 4 years ago, as we all are. And that, clearly with a chunk of voters, particularly those who are not as partisan and those who are younger, that is a big deal. So that is a headwind. There's no getting around that. It makes it harder for him. I think we also are seeing headwinds because he was the president during the highest rise in inflation in 30 years. And Democrats will say that it was a global phenomenon. It was post-COVID. That's true from an economic standpoint, but that doesn't really matter to voters. And that inflation hit lower income voters harder than it hit higher income voters because a lot of basic necessities became more expensive. Also, the rise in interest rates means it's harder to afford a home. So that is the headwind. And then we also have the Gaza war hurting him with younger voters and Arab American voters who are concentrated in Michigan, or not concentrated, but Michigan is a high percentage. So those are all headwinds for him. And you see this in the polls. He's, according to Real Clear Politics average, he's about 1 or 2 points trailing Donald Trump in the last average I saw. However, those averages are like 45 to 43. So there's still a large chunk of people who, even in those polls, are undecided. And in the other polls that we've seen, I think New York Times CNN is one of the best. What we saw is that a lot of people are still fluid because they asked if Donald Trump were convicted of a criminal conviction, who would you vote for? And there was a massive swing against Donald Trump. I believe it was 17 points, but don't quote me on that. They then asked, what do you think about abortion? The Democratic position was much more popular in many more states. And there are also going to be referenda on abortion in a number of swing states. I believe Nevada, Arizona, Florida might not be a swing state anymore, but there are still a few congressional seats that are swingy there. That's going to drive up turnout, and it's also going to increase the salience of that issue. So I think what we're going to see from now on is that it could be that, yes, Biden is simply too old, and there are a number of voters who are relatively nonpartisan in their affiliation who just want the more energetic candidate. And even though Democrats will say that Trump says nonsense energetically, I think that doesn't necessarily matter because performance matters. You're also going to see a ton of paid advertising about issues, and both sides are going to have a ton of money in this cycle. So what I'm projecting to happen this cycle is I think Biden will start to climb up. I think voters will start to come back to him who are currently disapproving of both. He does absolutely have difficulties with younger voters, but he has to hope that Gaza is done by then. He has to hope that Donald Trump's statements that he's going to round up and deport every single undocumented immigrant is going to hurt him with the Latino community. And he's going to have to hope that Donald Trump's criminal convictions do happen this year, the trials happen, and people are reminded of why Donald Trump was the most disapproved president in history when he left office. As for the trials, I don't think they're all going to be delayed. It does look as if the Washington case on January 6th will happen. I mean, I don't know, but if the Supreme Court doesn't kick it completely down the road, it will happen starting in May or June, so finish before the election. But then again, these are the things I don't know. And this is why I say I think Biden has a good chance, but it's only 55-45, because there are a lot of things that have to break his way, where there are things that could break Donald Trump's way. And the one factor that I think very few people in Washington are aware of is that since 4 years ago, and certainly since 8 or 12 years ago, the information ecosystem has completely fragmented. We see huge declines in local news. Cord cutting means that people aren't watching local television news, and some of them aren't even watching cable news. And the rise of social media or algorithmic media TikTok, Instagram as a way for people to get their news means that they often don't get straight political news. And we see these informational, misinformation, disinformation, but also just confirmation happening that makes it really hard for any candidate to change what they have to think. Now, we assume that that helps Donald Trump because right-wing media is a bit more cohesive, but we don't know. And this is something that I think is going to be really, just from an analytical standpoint, interesting to see what happens over the course of the summer. Do polls actually change as events change, or are people basically locked in, and are enough voters insulated from what goes on in America that they don't know? And then that is going to matter a lot for Congress, because if events don't really matter, how does that affect governing down the road? Does it become more captured by interest because you don't have public opinion actually sensitive to what you do? Or does it mean people have space to actually do what they want? That I don't know the answer to that, but I'm just throwing it out there because it's something that I think is going beneath the surface. It's been going on for a long time. I think that it was 2014 that members of the Obama White House first started seeing a lot of conspiracy theories from Facebook show up in focus groups. No one has ever had a good answer to it, but it's about 10 years, and I think it's accelerating and getting much worse. And the downfall of Twitter under Elon Musk is actually, I think, a major contributor to that folks are not aware of. But I think a bigger one is just the rise of cord cutting and the decline of local journalism. And so, yeah, that is, to me, my big long-term worry for the fate of the country is, what do you do when you have a democracy but without an informed public?
I canceled my cable this morning, actually. So it's funny you talk about cord cutting. I want to go back to a comment you made about voter turnout. I'm located most of the time in Ohio, as is Becky. And so we just lived through a couple of votes on the abortion issue, a couple of special elections here. And in special elections across the country, we've really seen high turnout from Democrats on issues, for example, like abortion, whereas some of the Republican primaries, we've seen lower turnouts. There have been, complicating factors like weather, among other things. But, what do you see ahead in terms of voter turnout? Do you think we're going to see any of the dynamics that we've seen at play over the past couple months in the special elections or the primaries, or do you think it's going to be an entirely different beast when we get to November? Anybody?
I'll jump in. I think we don't know. We don't know how indicative this is going to be. It does seem as if this will be a low turnout election in November, at least relative to the past two cycles, simply because people aren't as interested in the candidates. It's a lot more disapproval of that. If that happens, that helps Democrats. Certainly for turnout, the various abortion referenda are going to boost turnout in those areas among either Democratic voters, or it's going to help switch voters to Democrats. But ultimately, this is something that we just don't know. And I'm sure every single campaign is trying to model what their win threshold is. And I'm sure they're having a lot of arguments because no one really knows the answer.
Yeah, gonna disagree with my friend Chris here. So like if you poll an RFK Jr. Voter, if you poll a Biden voter, if you poll a Trump voter, there's only one of those voters that will walk over fire on November to vote for that candidate. Only one of them. And it's only the Trump voter. They will walk through fire to vote for him. Biden's like, I mean, typically the Biden voter is a person who wants to vote against Trump, right? So that's the most motivated Biden voter you get. And so we call them the stickiness of the voter. So that's going to be, it's going to be hard to model this. There's no question. I think that there's no question. I think that the most motivated voters is going to be the Trump voter this election cycle. And then I think that, and then we always, again, it's just amazing how fast our memory resets. But I remember back when President Obama was amazing, this transformational president, and then he lost the House the next time because his name wasn't on the ballot. We can look at special elections every single day, all day long. Donald Trump is not on that ballot, right? So when Donald Trump's name is on the ballot, the Trump voter will emerge and they'll come. And so I think that's likely. Again, we can always look about reading the tea leaves of these special elections. If the top of the ticket's not on there, and again, we all know the Trump, I'm sure we all know some Trump voters. They're just highly motivated to vote for him. And so it bears that out poll after poll after poll, focus group after focus group after focus group of these folks. And so they just, just highly motivated to vote for him again. So I think that, I think that's likely that the scenario that we're facing going into this election. I think it's going to be, again, very long, very bitter, crazy campaign, extremely expensive. It'd probably be better for Americans if we just, send them all their portion of the checks. There's gonna be the $1 billion in these campaigns. But that's not, it's not the way it's going to be. And so we're left to this weird thing where genuinely the majority of Americans don't want either of them. And it's, again, frustrating for those Americans. But, like you're looking, you're in Ohio and you look at the former Rust Belt and others, that just, I guess when you step back from it, it really doesn't, and this is kind of what frustrates, I think, for a lot of folks that are not kind of political junkies, but Joe Biden could win in an overwhelming popular vote. It's going to come down to almost 10 states. And every one of those 10 states, Trump is winning. Some by a lot, right? So it just doesn't matter. I mean, at the end of the day, unless you're in Ohio or Wisconsin or Arizona, it's just not going to matter. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but it is going to be a handful of swing states that really matter. And I promise you, both campaigns know that. They're going to spend a ton of money trying to change ideas and voices and thoughts in those states. I feel bad for everyone who lives in those states because it's going to be just enveloped by politics. Yeah. But that's at the end of the day, that's what this campaign is going to be about. And again, I'm traditionally a Republican voter and I work for Republican politics. Really, genuinely, I really am kind of agnostic on this. And it just, the dominoes are lining up in those states more for Trump than they are for Biden. It just happens to be the case, and something would have to come in and displace the momentum. And you look at the analogous campaign to the one that's being run now, which is Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter lost every state that term, right? He literally lost everyone but one. And so I guess like you can talk your book and stuff, but it's just the reality is the closest election we've seen to this cycle is going to be Jimmy Carter. Economy's difficult, you can kind of do a guess the decade thing, but like if we have American hostages being held by Iranian, I mean, genuinely, it's like we're reliving the 1970s. OPEC is restricting oil supply. All of those things are coming and they're really impacting Americans' lives. Americans now pay more for food than they have in the last 30 years, right? I mean, it's just, I mean, inflation's, I know we're going to the economy soon, but inflation's still on the rise, all right, which means that interest rates are not going to be cut this year. So I've been forecasting, so I think this campaign is being set up literally like the 1970s. It's almost exactly the same. It's almost the exact same campaign. It's really interesting. And so I guess we'll see how it goes, but I think it's going to be certainly longer than 1970 campaign, but it's more money will be spent, but it's and maybe a lot more bitter, but it's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting campaign to watch and luckily not be a part of.
I want to ask one more campaign question, and then we won't spend too much time on it and get into the economy. But Chris, I thought it was interesting, you mentioned the walk through fire voters for Trump, and we definitely see that. I'm curious, how do you think the women's turnout or women's vote is going to affect? There's been, so much happening and reproductive restrictions over the past couple of months. Do you think we're going to see women come out in droves or not so much that it will make a difference? I'm just curious about both of your thoughts.
What Oates said is right. I mean, the Democrats are playing a smart. You can kind of go back to like when Bush, when Karl Rove did this crazy thing on it was gay marriage at the time, would drive out Republican voters. And so like ballot initiatives that really did drive out Republican voters. And I think the Democrats have done a pretty good job of qualifying for ballots that matter. In abortion issues, right? So you will drive out those single issue voters, and many of them will be women. Typically, in a situation where the economy is in a negative, it's like typically people vote first on their pocketbook issues or their kitchen table issues. So if they don't feel secure in their family financial setting, they usually vote on that first, and then issues that are like social issues, others issues, not very important issues, but they typically tend to come second. And so that's why it's just a call about where the economy is going to be. And we're going to go to that next, but I think that the answer to your question, it's kind of, I'm sorry it's taking so long, but is this. I think that if the trend is that Trump maintains his outsized portion of Hispanic and African American voters, he can tend to lose soccer moms, right? That they can displace each other, and Trump still wins, right? So it's interesting to see this dynamic happening. It's such a weird thing. Being a traditional Republican, these are two demographics that typically tend to not vote Republican, but they are in large numbers. And so it's just going to be a matter of can single issue voters on abortion overcome the movement toward Republicans for Hispanic and African Americans? I don't know. Again, my guess is yes in those important states. Right. So, but I don't, I get it. It's, anyone who tell you this, they know it's not going to happen, they'd be lying. But I think you look at the trends, you look at all the other things. Let's say this way. I certainly want to rather be Donald Trump in this election than Joe Biden.
Chris, so any last words on elections, and then we'll get to economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think elections just come down to arithmetic, and women are the largest demographic group in the country. They're a majority of the country. And what we saw in 2022 is that where the Democrats performed worst in New York and California, two states where there was basically no chance that abortion was going to be an issue because Democrats control state government. They did best in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, where that was seen to be on the ballot. And obviously in referenda, it's a very popular position. And so what Democrats are going to run on is the fact that Donald Trump is floating a national abortion ban, which will drive up turnout across the country and certainly in those areas. And I think the reckoning is that, yes, they may lose African-American voters, who are about 11 to 12% of the country. But if they drop a point and they pick up 3 points among women, that's a larger percentage. So it just comes down to numbers. And I think that's why it's going to be a major issue, not just because it's an important issue on its own, but because it is the single best argument Democrats have to retain control of government.
Thank you. Okay, I know we have 10 minutes left, and I want to get to the economy. I think we have just a couple questions here. I think I'll pose the first one, and then Becky can close us out at the end. But I know when we talked, or when you talked with Liz several months ago, at the end of the year, we were talking about a looming recession. We haven't reached that point yet, but it could be coming. So, for Chris Campbell, what do you see now? Do we still have a looming recession? Yes or no, and what factors do you think have led us to that path?
Yeah, it's a great question. So again, so I have to kind of step back a bit and say that that almost 90% of economists got it wrong, and where we got it wrong was, I think, that late last year, as we thought, there were many of our economists, including myself, were forecasting a recession in the back half of last year. And what we did not factor in is there's something just magical about what happens when you're born in America, and something's infused in your DNA, and you just have to buy stuff. You just, and even if you don't have money, you still buy stuff. And the average American family has actually, they have so much stuff that they actually have storage units, right? So we just, as Americans, need to buy. We have this amazing, and it makes us the best economy on the entire planet. We are the engine, the economic engine for literally the entire world, and the envy of the entire world because of that. Where economists largely got it wrong is that we just didn't see, weren't able to model well just the resiliency of the American consumer and how much they would spend. They are the ones driving and drove, I believe, have driven, have pushed off the economic reckoning that's probably going to be upon us soon. But we're, you know, I kind of go through the numbers here, but 60% of the country live paycheck to paycheck. We have, and now collectively, as United States, as members, kind of as Americans, we're now $1.2 trillion credit card debt. That's record highs, at record interest rates. So it's the monthly payment is significantly higher for the average American. Home sales are going to be crushed because of the high interest rates, which are going to have to remain high now because inflation is now back on the rise. So that means that the Federal Reserve cannot and will not lower interest rates likely this entire year. And so you have this weird thing we're in place now where the jobs are still strong, and they kind of be unusually strong. And Tom, I'm telling you, like using traditional economic modeling, none of this makes sense. But here's the reality, right? So American consumers pushed through December. I call it the Santa Claus bounce, making sure that Christmas came for their families. But that consumer spending has fallen off the cliff for January. If that trend continues and the American consumer has run out of steam, the economy is going to decline, and it will decline either slowly or fast, but it will be in a negative trajectory. There are three other sources that could change that, which are the U.S. government spending, which good luck. I don't think we're going to see massive amounts of capital being infused by this Congress in the U.S. To the U.S. consumer. That'd be like stimulus packages or that kind of stuff. I don't think we're going to see any of that. Or funds, many of the big funds that I advise, private equity, venture capital funds that are sitting on trillions of dollars on parked cash, waiting for the economy to correct, and then go in and start buying companies, or like reinvesting, and or large families, very very high, ultra high net worth families that are also sitting on trillions of dollars of cash that also waiting for opportunistic buying of companies and different equities. And so I think, and there's just a perverse, in a high interest rate environment, there's a perverse, you're perversely incentivized to keep your money in cash, because you can always guarantee like especially if you're very wealthy, spend a 6% return on capital and your bank account, where the markets, you just don't know how that's going to go. And so we're in this weird spot where I think now, my call is, and it has been, that I think we're going to start seeing a decline in the economy, where I think the American consumer is just out of steam. I don't know how long that'll last. Hopefully it'll be very short, because it really deeply negatively impacts everyone. But I think if we do see that happening, I think that it will certainly have significant political implications. But all that being said, the fundamentals of the economy are the American consumer. If they stop spending, that is going to be negative, significant negative on the economy. You do see OPEC actually restricting supply. So I think that but the Americans have created more supply of energy, of oil and natural gas. So it's a bit of a price stabilization. But if that changes, that anywhere in that dynamic changes, that's going to be a significant shock. And then we still see inflation, core inflation. So the things that really Americans really feel, like food and rent and things, are still on the rise. And it will remain a high interest rate environment, because the Federal Reserve can't lower interest rates when inflation is on the rise. So those are the fundamentals of the economy. And so I've always, again, I'm I deal with finance and economy all the time, so I'll talk my book of business, but I believe that if we're in a negative environment, it's going to color a lot of what we see in politics, and I think it'll be, I just think in general, I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. I think if you're an incumbent in DC, you're in a lot of trouble. In that environment, I think American people will be really sick of things that, things go really bad. I don't think we're going to be in the 70s environment this way, but we had stagflation. But I think, even if we're in a negative growth environment, it could lead to the recession word, and that could, it'll just be, there's something really psychological about that that's really negative. And it will, most American families, the far majority of American families will actually feel that in a really negative way. And that's, deeply concerning, and it's unfortunate and tragic. I just think that it's, there's a couple things in the equation that could change, but I don't see any of those things coming really quick. I mean, because again, the private sector money that's on the sides need the economy and want the economy to slow down, because it'll change. If you can buy a company for $1 million today or $500,000 tomorrow because the economy goes bad, they're going to wait, right? So that's kind of like the fundamentals of what's happening, and we're going to see that play out, I think, over the next 12 to 24 months.
Chris Oates, you want to talk economy or share any advice you have for folks dialing in today, given what may be coming with the economy and with politics? We'll let you have the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Chris Campbell said, there are warning signs, but also 90% of economists were wrong over the last couple of years. So it may be that our models aren't accounting for what a post-pandemic economy looks like. I don't know. I'm not an economist. What I will say is, if you're a business out there who's worried about the economy or campaigns, you should have plans in place for no matter what happens. A Democrat win, a Republican win for the White House, the Senate, and the House. What's your strategy for both the federal level and the state level? And who are your representatives? Who are the people who matter for your area? And yeah, I mean, I think it's every business should, at least every quarter, not only attend things like this, but sit down with your team and say, like, if Donald Trump is the president in 2025, what does that mean for our current strategy? Do we need to change it? What about if it's Biden? What if it's about Biden with a Democratic trifecta? What are the legislation priorities that they will have? How do they affect us? You should probably have a playbook for every single one of those options. In case of this, we do these things. And what do you have to do in advance of that to be well prepared? Because especially if you're in industry, business in a very well-regulated industry, those regulations don't just happen overnight. They take time to develop, and they take time to be implemented. So you should be, if you have a 5-year vision of like where you're going to build your next manufacturing facility, and you need these tax credits in place, they need to be in place for 10 years. You should be definitely thinking about who's going to be in office there, where it will change. The few things I'll point out is North Carolina has a governor's election this year. They already have a Republican supermajority in the state legislature, so the governor doesn't have a lot of power, but that could flip to be a Republican trifecta. And Wisconsin just 2 days ago passed a different set of legislative maps, so Wisconsin could have a Democratic trifecta. So if you're concerned about policy changes, those are at the state level. Those are the 2 states to look out for. Ohio, I know that your former speaker is going to jail, I believe. So there might be a little bit more.
He's in jail. Yeah.
He's in jail. So you always need to be worried about that, especially in any one-party state. Like, is there someone who is at the peak of power, but who people are saying is corrupt, and you might want to stay away from doing business with them? I personally know someone in Ohio who's probably going to be going to jail for public corruption, which we can talk about offline. But yeah, just be aware of that, because it happens in this country, and you don't want to have your entire advocacy strategy hinging on one person who people are telling you, like, you got to watch out for that. But yeah, generally, my advice is always have a strategy for whatever happens in politics, because if we can't predict it, you can't predict it, no one can predict it. The voters will ultimately decide, but you can certainly be prepared for whatever happens.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate hearing both of your unique perspectives with all your backgrounds. there's a lot going on this year. We will be posting this on the G2G website for those who want to come back and hear the analysis again, or if you missed it, or portions of it. Additionally, we will be meeting again in May for the next round of what's happening in Washington, May 21st. And again on August 21st and then November 14th. So those are the last.
Mark the dates. Look ahead.
Yeah, mark those dates. Hopefully we'll have some more rosy pictures to talk about, generally speaking. But a lot of great analysis. Appreciate you both for being here. And we will see you in a few months. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks to you both. It's been fun today.
Thank you.
Sure.